Before you go on, I just want to make sure to address that. Scott mentioned the whole issue of nursery workers, and that's one area. But I would say, generally speaking, you need to be a member of our church. If you're going to be in a leadership position, and the line is kind of fuzzy here, but if you're going to be in an area of public ministry where you're giving testimony in a format that's designed to lead people. So, for example, we require all of our choir members to be members of the church because we consider that a public ministry where testimony of Jesus Christ is being given, as well as the aforementioned things like nursery, where we require you can be a non-member to be a support person, but there has to be a member, an adult member. Leading every nursery activity or children's ministry activity or teen activity, etc. So I think, again, the line is a little bit fuzzy because, what's public ministry, what's support, what's not, so forth and so on. But generally, that's the standard we try to operate by.
Right, and in your context, it's healthy for that community, so that's good. And I think one of the things folks who have been here, if you watch the videos from the other guests that we've had in, that line is drawn a little bit differently in different places, and I think you guys it's neat to watch that, and yet, that's what the Spirit's doing there. It's fine. Second, how does your community make decisions which affect the whole? How are those with dissenting points of view addressed? Because that has to be addressed. And in what ways does the community ensure that decisions are actually carried out? That's a huge problem for churches. So how do you make the decisions? How do you address those with dissenting viewpoints? And when you make a decision, how do you make sure that it's actually done?
Well, that's really easy. Brian makes all the decisions and it's final. No, I'm just kidding.
The papacy comes to bromance. Yeah, okay. How do you guys make the decisions there?
Well, one of the last 4 or 5 slides we showed in the slideshow was our structure, our organizational structure, and that the ministry teams really is the process by which we do most of the work. So each ministry team, for example, Scott and I are part of the spiritual formation ministry team. There are 4 or 5 other people on that team, and then we have that ministry team has some sub teams with other individuals who are not on that ministry team proper, but are involved in roles that kind of flow out of that ministry team. I'd say the vast majority of decisions that are made in the church are made at the ministry team level. There's very little decision making that occurs at a board level, except to the extent that it has to be that it cuts across multiple, 1 or more ministry teams.
Okay.
There are occasions when Brian will say, this is what I want done, this is how I want to do it, we need to work through to make sure that we get to this end. But I would say that's the exception, more the exception than the rule. If you would agree with that.
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, I know that Brian has made, the reason I made the joke about Brian being the guy who makes all the decisions, because he is almost from the inception said, I don't want that responsibility. He basically I think he was more along the lines that the way in which he believed in discipling people is, ultimately you're responsible for making decisions, not me. So what he was trying to do is, create a foundational structure that, as Byron has said, that equipped each ministry team with whatever your focus happened to be, that you're responsible for the decisions that are made on your team, you're responsible for handling all the issues that are around those decisions, etc., so that theoretically that kind of like multiplies the leadership responsibility rather than always having it come up to one guy. Obviously, there are going to be those times when you have to have the guy at the top be the tiebreaker on maybe some issues. But as Byron said, those are extremely few and far between.
I want to jump to the bottom part of that question.
How do we make it done? Okay.
Well, not so much how do we make it done, because I do think that obviously the ministry teams are an executing arm as well as they're tactical and they execute. So, but the whole point of assessment, how do we make sure that it was done in the way that it was intended to be done, and we approach that a couple of different ways. Number one, on a quarterly basis, even though the decision making is generally not reviewed at a detailed level at the board level, each ministry team is responsible for providing a one-page written summary of what's going on in the ministry team on a monthly basis.
Gotcha, okay.
On a quarterly basis, we actually sit down and have a broad discussion because each ministry team has a board representative as well as a staff pastor on it.
Okay.
And so on a quarterly basis, we sit down and we'll devote a significant, maybe an entire meeting to looking at what issues arose within a ministry team. How are those things being addressed? What was the intent of engaging in that activity? How is it progressing? What problems are you experiencing? What barriers are you facing? How are you overcoming those barriers? What help do you need from the rest of us? Or in some cases, how come this is not happening?
Okay, right.
All right. Annually, each ministry team goes through an assessment. So, for example, we're coming up next month. The spiritual formation team will be assessed, or at least what we attempted to do in this past church year. Our church year runs from April to March. Unfortunately, we love to get on a calendar year, but that's a denominational district issue. And so we're going to be assessed, and there is an assessment format that looks at what our goals were for the year, how we performed against those goals, what the impact on the church community was, or how do we perceive it was. Again, the whole issue of barriers that need to be overcome, problems experienced, so forth and so on. That's done in a written report that goes to every staff member and every board member. Brian, along with 2 or 3 other individuals, one of whom is a person in the congregation who's not on the ministry team, who may not even be on the ministry team, to provide a different perspective, will serve as the assessment team. So be another board member, so it wouldn't be Scott for our team, it would be another board member, someone from the congregation, and potentially one other person. We will sit down and dialogue with them over the course of 2 hours or so about our team and our team's performance over the year. And so those are, I think, 3 ways that we look at, again, because virtually everything revolves around the ministry team format. That's essentially how we look at ministry assessment.
Right. Now let me ask you, that dialogue that goes in with someone who's a board member from another team, or that dialogue is based on the performance of that ministry team, based on the mission you guys displayed in your presentation. It's not, well, I want to do this. It's more like, well, we said this is who we are. How well are you?
One of the first questions that would come up, and I doubt very seriously whether we would make it to the annual assessment, is because I'm accountable to Brian as a staff pastor.
Right.
He sees the goals up front. He sees the goals at the beginning of the year. If he has a question, he's going to ask me, how does this goal align with your team's mission and the church's mission?
Right, okay.
I need to be able to answer that question. If I can't do it satisfactorily and Scott can't help me, then the goal probably is going to go down the tubes real fast.
So right at the beginning.
Right. So there is a pretty rigorous goal setting process at the beginning of each church year. As a matter of fact, we've just completed that. So it's not going to make it to an assessment.
Gotcha.
So absolutely, it is very much aligned.
All right.